Coming up on episode 44 of Create If Writing, we're talking about connecting with influencers.
I can't go back to sleep, it's almost light. These restless thoughts have kept me up again tonight.
Hello and welcome to episode 44 of the Create If Writing podcast. I'm your host, Kirsten Oliphant, and this is the podcast for writers, bloggers, and creatives, all about building authentic platform without feeling smarmy. So in the spirit of non-smarminess, we're going to talk all about connecting with influencers, and I'm actually the meat of the episode is just me talking, but I did something a little different, and I took one of my sessions from the Profitable Blogging Summit that I did last week, and that is actually going to be the main part of the episode today. So it may sound a little bit different in terms of the sound quality and everything because it was a different kind of recording, but in any case, it's all about influencers, how to connect with them in a really authentic, non-icky way. So before we get into that, I just want to say that I survived the summit. In episode 43, I talked about what it takes to run a summit, and I could probably do another episode, but I'm not because I'm summited out. But the Profitable Blogging Summit was really amazing. I don't know that I set out actual goals, and so it's hard to say like it was a success according to my goals, but I would say it was a success based on the feedback, which has been phenomenal. And the over 2,000 people who came, I've been getting emails from people who have said things like it has completely changed everything about the way they blog and changed the way they look, it changed the way they feel, the way they're spending their time. And it's really amazing to hear some of these stories. So it's just really been phenomenal. And the speakers as well have had great things to say about how this audience responded to them and connected with them and has been buying their products and signing up for their email list and engaging. So overall, I was really pleased. And I'm also really exhausted. So last week, I actually did record an episode that should have been up last Wednesday. And it's all about crisis management, which I'm going to have to do next week because I think this is actually pretty hilarious. One of the crises that I talked about is tech issues in that episode. And just to be really extra meta, that episode was somehow like eaten by my computer. It's not stored in the temporary files. Actually, it did store it. It stored it completely blank after I had done all of the sound editing and done everything else and was about to put it up on my media host. It died. And so, that's part of a crisis. And my response to that crisis last week was, I don't have time to redo this. So we'll probably do that next week in episode 45. But I thought that was pretty hilarious. And I mean, I was frustrated, yes, but these are the kind of moments in life where you just have to say, like, this is what happened. So I can either laugh about it or like go break something or I don't know, whatever. You have a choice of responses to a crisis. So we will talk about crises in the next episode and some of the responses that you can have. I chose to find it amusing that in my episode about dealing with a crisis, I had a crisis and the episode is gone. So we'll do that again. But I really wanted to bring this session to you from the Profitable Blogging Summit because this was actually a late addition to the lineup of sessions for the summit. And I wanted to include it because I think it's really important that we collaborate with others. And I'll get into this more in the actual meat of the episode here. But I think it really is important. And I think so many people do this wrong. And I see people all the time either ignoring the people below them or at the same level and trying so hard to connect with these big names, and they think it's going to somehow establish their whole brand and they're going to have success if they just do this or that. And not even like specific influencers, but I was in a Facebook group I had to leave of writers, and I had to leave it because I got so frustrated by people talking about getting on HuffPost. And the Huffington Post is great. It can be really helpful to you, but at the same time, you're not going to somehow make your career because Arianna Huffington's assistant emails you back and says they like your story idea and signs it Arianna Huffington or Arianna. Anyway, building your platform takes a lot of work. Connecting with influencers is a piece of that, but it's really important how we do this. And it's also important that you realize it's not going to, getting connected in one of these big ways is not going to make you. You have so much other work to do. At the same time, it is important to connect with people. And I have found through the podcast and the summit that I've had to do that a lot and really kind of just get really brave and reach out to people, even if that's sometimes uncomfortable for me. So I'm going to now outline some of the ways that you can do this and be both effective and also not smarmy. So I'll see you on the other side of the episode. Hello, welcome to the Profitable Blogging Summit. I'm your host, Kirsten Oliphant, and in this solo session, I'm going to be talking about how to connect with influencers. So this is something I have learned to do, and I think was kind of something I was already doing before I learned it. For the last year, especially as I launched the Creative Writing Podcast, and also for this summit, there are some big names on here, and so I want to kind of talk about how you can connect with people in that way and in a way that's not smarmy or gross. Because there are people definitely who do that. And maybe you've been contacted by people in a way that you feel like is smarmy and gross. Because most of the time, maybe you're somebody's influencer. There's somebody who's wherever you are, there's people below you and you're the influencer and they're reaching out to you. So you may have had some of these kind of smarmy contacts too. And I don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. And we'll talk about why. So I'm going to start out by talking about collaborations in general and then get specifically to influencers. And when I say influencers, I just really mean people who are kind of above where you are in terms of numbers or reach or influence. So collaborations are important just altogether. I don't think I really learned how to blog well until I collaborated with other people. And I did that through a local Houston bloggers group, which is a fantastic local group here in Houston, and also through the Blog Elevated conference, which was put on by the founders of the Houston bloggers group. And so that's where I met a ton of other bloggers and started really connecting, asking questions, getting together, doing different things together. And so I really don't feel like I got blogging and some of the ins and outs until I started talking to other people. And I think it's really important that you have people that are kind of below you, at your same level, and then also above you. So you don't want to just connect with one kind of group. So if you connect only with people who are newer or know less, then you're going to feel like you're like the smartest person in the room, right? And if you only connect with people who are kind of above you, then you're going to feel like you don't know anything. And that's not always true too. You need to value the info you have. And if you connect only with people who are at your same level, sometimes it's hard to move past that level. So I think it's very important to connect with all three and not necessarily value one more than the other. So, but when it comes to influencers who are larger than you, I think it is really important that we make those connections, and they can be really valuable in terms of your blogging, in terms of growing your knowledge and also your expertise and authority. So I want to talk about some specific ways to do that and not do that. So in the last year, I launched the Creative Writing Podcast, and one of the things that I started out doing, and that's the kind of the first principle, is that you want to connect with people before you need something. So I didn't say, okay, I'm going to launch a podcast. Let me make a list of all the people I want to interview and then go follow them on Twitter or email them and say, do you want to be on my podcast? I made a list of the people I already knew. So I made a list of all the people I had either met at a conference, mostly people I actually had talked with or talked with on Twitter, had some actual interaction, not just like retweeting something of theirs, not just kind of an empty share of something of theirs, but something a little bit more than that. So I made that list first. And then I also did make a list of people that were kind of like my dream list of people that I hadn't connected with yet. And then I did go follow those people on Twitter, but I didn't follow them on Twitter and then start asking them things right away. So I would recommend connecting way before you need something. And if you think you want to connect with somebody or ask them to do something with you or for you or collaborate, connect way ahead of time and interact way ahead of time so that it doesn't seem like you're just using them or just connecting to get that. Because if you are just connecting to get something from them, I don't think that's the best practice. So all of the people that I have asked to be on the summit, for example, are all people I was connected with. There were a few I hadn't actually personally talked with. And that was the first time I'd done kind of cold emails where there wasn't much of a connection. And I'll tell you a little more about how I did that or why that was effective in this case. But for the most part, but all of them I had already either followed on Twitter, was a subscriber to their email list, had attended a webinar or workshop with them, had seen them speak at a conference, actually talked to them. So there was some kind of connection. So definitely connect way before you need something or want to ask something. Number 2 is to give generously without expecting anything back. And I think Twitter is a really good place just in general to connect with influencers. So that's probably one of the key places that I connect is Twitter. I think Twitter makes the world small. You're able to actually reach people who are huge and amazing. And sometimes you might be just reaching their virtual assistant, but, when they respond or reply to you, you don't really know who's behind the account, but it is still a really good way to get on the radar of somebody who may never answer your email or may never, go to your thing or see your tweets unless you follow them and start retweeting their stuff or sharing their stuff with a tag. And I think you can do this generously without being like stalky or creepy. And so, figure what that is for you. Like if you don't share 10 links a day normally, don't share 10 links of just one person's stuff because that is creepy. That's like stalky. You don't want to stalk people, but you want to share for them, ideally because they have great content and you want to share that with your audience. And so you don't want to just share to try to get on their radar because some people don't check their, their mentions and things like that. And if they're not following you back, then they have to actually go and see the notifications. Like I get a notification on my phone, an email and a text. If somebody that I know and that I follow retweets my thing or tags me, I get a notification. If I don't know them, then I have to actually go look in my mentions or notifications to see who has been talking to me. So they may not see for like weeks if they don't check Twitter a lot, and some people don't. So you want to give generously, but not go crazy, and not expect that there's going to be a return. And a lot of people on Twitter, if you follow them, will follow you back. Not everybody. A lot of people, if you retweet something, will reply and say thanks, or maybe share something back of yours. Not everybody though. And so I found what I have lists of influencers in different niches. So like I'm all over the place. I like food. So I have food bloggers. I have people who talk about writing and publishing and self-publishing. I have people who talk about blogging. I have people who talk about social media. And in Hootsuite, which is the tool that I use with Twitter, they're all in different lists and different categories. So I will go in on a good week. I will go in ahead of time and see things, pull things from those different lists from influencers. And you kind of create them yourself of like the different people, you add people in that you want. So like I chose influencers in those different topics and niches, and then I will go through and auto schedule or set up each day how many I want for those influencers. So I'm constantly, especially the good weeks, this has not been a good week with the summit, I'm not sharing a lot, but I will go in and share the things from different people. And the different people that I put in there, they're not all people I'm going to ever ask something from, but they have things of value to my audience who's following me that are interested in those things. And so I give generously without expecting or asking back. And I think that's a really important distinction. And another way, if you're using Twitter to connect with those influencers, is not just to retweet something or share from their blog and tag them, but to also maybe hit reply to like a great post and say, this was great. I loved your point about X. That's a really, really good way because people don't always talk on Twitter anymore and they may not talk back to you. And I think it's a good indication if you talk or share a couple times, maybe not again, all in 1 week to be stalky, but, over the course of a month or two, if you share or reply and they don't do anything, then you may not have so much luck if it comes to actually asking for something, but you can kind of tell, like, maybe you talk to somebody, they talk back, and then they follow you, and then they share something of yours. You've established a connection, and Twitter is really, really good for that. So I do want to recommend that as a tool. If you're kind of like, I don't know what to do with Twitter, make Twitter about connections. If it's nothing else, if you don't get a lot of traffic to your blog, make it about the connections. So when it does come to asking, it's really important that you consider how. So first, we've connected long before we're going to ask anything. Then we've given generously without expecting anything back. And then when it comes to the ask, we're going to be really careful about how we ask. And a lot of people recommend having kind of a template for asking. Like, so I'm going to use podcasting as an example, but it could just as well be a guest post on your blog, or maybe you want to guest post on their blog or some other kind of collaboration. Maybe you want to do a joint venture and have a webinar together. That's kind of an upper level of commitment because usually that involves money and splitting things up. So let's talk about maybe guest posts and podcast interviews or something of that nature first, where it's typically unpaid, some kind of connection, but it's not a huge commitment. So if you're going to ask, it's great to have a template, to have an idea, but you do not want to send the same form letter to everybody. You just don't. You want to have specific things that show that person you've taken the time to know who they are. Maybe you mentioned their latest blog post or even a blog post from a few weeks ago, or that masthead blog post that was like 3 years ago, you wrote about this and it changed my life and I've followed you ever since. Something of that nature, where you can actually say that. And sometimes I'll even say to people, we've talked a little bit on Twitter, but I've never emailed you, because then that way, and I'll put my handle in sometimes too. If it's more someone that I'm not quite sure, like we've interacted, but I'm not quite sure they actually know who I am, then I will say something like that. Like, hey, we've talked on Twitter, but I haven't emailed you before. I'm Kiki Mojo on Twitter. And, just kind of mention the fact that this is not a totally cold email. So that lets them know we've had some kind of conversation. And I'm really specific about what I ask. So you don't want to ask someone who is in a different niche to do something that's like not what they do. So that's a sure sign you have no idea who they are. So you have to kind of do your homework, which I think comes in that connecting and giving generously. If you're sharing their stuff on Twitter, you know what they share. You know the kind of content they create and curate. And curate is like what they share from other people. So, which is essentially what you're doing when you share other influencer stuff. You're curating really important links and things you think are valuable and sharing them with your audience. So you want to ask them in a way that shows them it's personal and that is actually specific to that person. So you can make a form or a template, copy and paste it, and then add in specific touches that are for that person. But you just want to make sure you don't ever like accidentally like copy and paste and then leave the wrong name in, things like that. Like we all make mistakes, but that's not what you want to do. That's not going to work for connecting. And you want to kind of consider what you're asking of them. And so, for example, thinking about this summit, I've had a lot of people ask me how the summit works. And I did a summit. I spoke at a summit before I actually launched this one. So I got to see kind of the back end. And I modeled this one a little bit like that one without an affiliate program. So a lot of summits or different kind of things that they have a paid option or a free option have an affiliate program. And I did not set one up for this because it was one piece I knew with all the other tech of running a summit I could not handle right now. And so when I contacted the influencers, I made sure to be clear, there's no affiliate programs, there's no money changing hands here. Here's exactly what it will cost you. And it was 30 minutes of your time for an interview. I did not require anybody to promote. I hoped they did. And most of the speakers have been amazing about promoting, but I'm not checking up on them because I didn't ask them for that. So I'm not going and making a list and saying, oh, she only put it on Twitter. She didn't send it to her email list. Like that feels gross to me because what I asked for was just them to do an interview. To me, that was valuable enough to get that 30 minutes of their time that they're not getting paid for to share. And so now if this had been a paid summit, so yes, there is the upsell option for $99 this week and $199 after for you to purchase the lifetime access pass, but otherwise the content is free. And a lot of them asked about that to be sure. So you want to be upfront to make sure, because if you are selling, like if this were a paid summit and everybody had to pay $50, $99 to actually see any of the content, I would never have asked them to do that for free, right? You don't want to ask a whole bunch of people, hey, do this for me. I'm not paying you, but I'm getting paid. That's gross. Okay. So you need to think about what exactly you're asking, how much of a commitment you're asking for. And a lot of summits get a bad rap. And I actually read an article and I could not find it again after I read it the first time about why you should say no to speaking at a summit. And it talked about how so many people doing summits email you kind of a cold email. Like I said, again, don't do the templates. They did templates and they required you to have a certain number of people on your email list. And they also required X number of promotions, whether they had an affiliate program or not. So there was a lot of like upfront commitment in addition to like the interview and stuff. And so I thought that what I wanted to do here was to give back as much as possible, to do a lot of social shares, to offer freebies if people wanted to give a freebie, like a sign up for their email list, to help grow their list, to help them get their word out there and to get people on their website. So it was as much a good thing for the people speaking at the summit as it was for us to have them at the summit. And so far, the feedback I've gotten has been really positive from the speakers. And that makes me so happy because that's what I want. I don't want to just take, and you don't want to just take. So you need to consider how you ask and kind of what you're asking for. So again, you're connecting before you need something. You're giving generously. You're asking in a way that is fair for what you're asking for and in a way that is specific to that person. And this one's kind of related to that, but you want to build relationships. So I think it's more important for you to build a relationship with an influencer than to get one yes. And I say that because you just never know what collaborations may come in the future. And I know I've connected with people and then found they asked me to come do something for them or for their audience. And it's just been a really good back and forth. And I feel like, okay, in a year, I'll still be talking to this person and I could email them in a second and we could just talk. And that's such an important thing. And so all of those things beforehand, the giving, the connecting, the asking in the right way helps you build a relationship. So if you just cold email somebody, you're not starting a relationship, you're just asking for a favor and they don't even know you. So doing all that work ahead of time is something that's actually putting the foundation that maybe you could have a relationship rather than just getting somebody to guest post for you. But maybe it would be something longer. Maybe they'd guest post and then, do something more with you. So the people at the summit, many of them have already been on either the Creative Writing podcast, or I also for a while hosted the Business to Blogger podcast. So they were either on one of those two. And so I connected with them again, like, hey, remember that good time we had on the podcast? And I really made sure to do that with the people that I actually did have a good time with, because sometimes you just don't gel with people as well. And that doesn't mean if I didn't ask somebody or they're not on the summit list that like we didn't get along at all. But there were people that stood out in terms of the relationship and people that I thought had a lot to offer. And so we did one thing. Now we've done another thing. Maybe we'll do another thing down the road. But again, I always want to give back. So if they've given me 2 interviews for free, I want to make sure I'm constantly promoting them and doing something that's helpful for them. And then you're going to get no's, no matter what you're asking for, how you're connecting. You're going to get people who never respond to your tweets or the fact that you've shared generously or anything else. You're going to get people who just no response at all. And then if you ask for something, you're going to get people who say no. So the first thing before you get a no, if you reach out to an influencer and they don't respond, give it a week and then hit reply to that email you sent. So it'll have the RE in the subject line. So they'll know it's actually kind of a bump. And then just have a really brief thing like, hey, I just wanted to reach out again and touch base to see what you thought about my idea. Short, sweet, to the point, the end. I know a lot of times it's that second email that gets people going. And so if you just write the one, I don't know about you, but I check my email. And if I don't remember, like if I'm in my car, which I never do while I'm driving, but if you're at a red light or you're parked in a parking lot, whatever it is, I'm in my car all the time and you're checking emails. And you see an email like, oh, I should reply to that. But you'd already opened it. You forget to hit mark on read and later you forget. So you always want to reach back out to people and just once. You don't want to do it necessarily more than that. A week is about a good enough time. You don't want to reach back out the next day. Now, if they say no, then don't take it personally. It's going to happen. It's not necessarily about you. Doesn't mean that person is a jerk. People are busy. And especially if it's not a paid thing and you're asking for something just for free, we all know how busy we are, and you probably have to say no to a lot of opportunities you'd like to say yes to too. So just don't take it personally and don't be mad at that person. It doesn't mean you can't reach back out again. And maybe you could say that, like, thanks so much. I hope maybe later we can collaborate on something like this, and leave that door open. So don't take the no's personally and don't close the door yourself. And then I think it's really important not to leave people in the dust. And what I mean by that is you don't want to, after you've done something, say they said yes, you don't want to just use them and leave them. So for thinking about the podcast, like the people that came on, again, I continued to share their stuff. I continued to be that supporter of their work and their content and continued to kind of drive traffic and send people their way. And I think that's really, really important because, again, if it's about relationship in a longer term, then it's very clear to that person you weren't just using them to get that one yes. You weren't tweeting to them and replying and all that stuff just to get a yes for something and have a short-term thing, that you support them after that too as a way of thanking them. And if they come on, you want to make sure you do a really good job, make it easy for them to share. Like if they come on the podcast, and I don't always do the best job. I send them a link, but a lot of people will send like a big, long thank you. I know Taylor Bradford for her Boss Girl Creative. I saw her writing handwritten thank you notes to the people who came on her show, which is amazing. But some people will send an image, like here's an image for your show to share. And I did that with the summit. Here's your session image to share to make it easy for them. Not because I required it, but because I wanted to make it easy. So if they did want to share, they had that freedom and it was easy. But don't leave people in the dust. Continue to follow up, continue to share and give generously to them and kind of keep that cycle going where you're connected even after they've given something to you. And I think all these things are really, really important because word gets around when you act like a jerk. Word gets around when people talk to each other. And I know I've talked to other bloggers and found that there are some people that everybody has a bad experience about, and they may not be putting it on Twitter, but if you get into a conversation with people, and they're all like, oh my gosh, we all can't stand that guy because he was such a jerk in this way. And so I think it's really, you don't want to be that person. You don't want to be the person that everybody is secretly talking about how you're such a jerk. You don't want to burn bridges if people say no, or if somebody does something for you and you don't thank them well or treat them well after. You don't want to be demanding, just overall. So like a lot of these are kind of just rules for being a nice person. But I think sometimes when it comes to connecting with somebody bigger, we don't know how to do it. And we feel kind of like, and so we don't do it well. So I think these are really great principles. Connect before you need something, give generously, ask in a way that's considerate of them, build relationships, don't take no personally, and then respond, follow up, and don't leave people in the dust are kind of the main things. And I've already mentioned Twitter as a great connector. Another one for me has been email, and kind of the way I've connected with people over email is most people have their email set up so that if you hit reply, they actually get the email. And I'm subscribed to a lot of people that I'm a big fan of for their email. And I've actually hit reply for a lot of those and established relationships that way. And again, you probably don't want to do it to every email, but if there's an email that has something great in it, hit reply. People love that. I love it when people hit reply. I encourage people to hit reply to my emails. And it's really neat, the conversations that can happen. They're a lot more personal. They're private. It's like a one-to-one conversation. It's really amazing. And so I will do that. I don't always get, like kind of with the tweet, same thing. Like you don't always get someone who says something, or sometimes they'll say thanks, but sometimes it sparks a conversation. And I know when people have connected with me that way, that's been really effective. I have some lifelong people that I would consider friends that I've never met who just every week replied to my email and we became friends. And that's a really great way too. So for me, Twitter and email have been the best ways to connect with people. There are lots of other ways that you can try and lots of other things, but those have been what work for me. And I do recommend, especially if you don't think Twitter is working for you, and we really didn't touch on Twitter at all in this conference, Twitter is such an amazing tool for connection. So if you've been ignoring it because of like traffic reasons and you don't see clicks or any responses, start putting yourself out there. Start the conversation or reply to someone else's conversation. You can take the initiative and really make those connections with big time people by using that tiny tool of Twitter. And it really does bring people together. So I just want to encourage you. It is super important. It's super helpful to connect with people's audiences. Oh, this is another big one. A lot of podcasters in particular, but sometimes people, when they have a guest post from somebody big or something else, they think that is going to instantly bring them fame because they're leveraging that person's platform. And that's not always the case. So for podcasting, and I did not think, okay, here are all the people I want to ask who are going to help me be famous and get lots of listens. That's not what I thought. I thought, here are people that have something of value that it could bring to my audience, and hopefully they'll share, and that's great. But I've had some huge people on who had less listens than somebody who was not as big but had a more engaged audience, or who actually took the time to share. So you just never know. But you're not going to build your own platform just on the backs of other people. So don't assume because you get somebody big that that's going to make your thing happen. You have to still make it happen, and you can utilize those relationships again in a way that's not icky or just using the person for something they can bring you back. But you have to also realize you may not get the return you think. So don't base your plan for growing your platform on other people's backs. That's not how it works. But that being said, connections are so important. They're vital. For me, again, they have the connections with people above me, at my level and below me, have all helped me to build and grow, and what I know as a blogger, and also the things I've been able to accomplish. And again, like looking at this summit has been just amazing, the lineup of people that we've gotten and the value that they have. Some of them have bigger audiences than me. Some of them have smaller, and probably the same for you. Some of you attendees probably have bigger audiences than some of the speakers, or than me or the hosts. They're just all over the place. And so I think we can always learn something from people at different stations. We shouldn't necessarily judge our worth or influence on the number of followers we have on a particular platform, because somebody may have 500 Twitter followers and 20,000 email subscribers. You just don't know. I think it's really important to connect on all the levels, but it is easier than you think maybe to connect with influencers. And one of the last things I wanted to say, I touched on this at the beginning and then didn't work it in actually where it was supposed to go. But when it comes to like reaching out to someone you don't have a relationship with. So a few of the speakers at the summit, I followed them on Twitter. I've probably shared once or twice, but we've never had a conversation. And so for a couple of those people, I waited until I had some big names already on the list for the summit before I reached out, because I think that helped validate. And that's one of the things that is important about connecting with influencers is it helps you gain authority in the space too when you're connected with someone that has that authority. It's kind of like that rubs off on you just a little bit. And again, I just want to be really sure that I'm not talking about this in a way that makes it seem like you're just using that person, because that's not at all what I mean. But just the reality is when you're rubbing shoulders with someone bigger, you start to be seen with more authority because that person has authority and you're hanging out with them, even if your reach is totally different. And so when I did do some of the reach outs for the summit for people I didn't have a connection with, I said, here's who we already have on board, because that gave sort of some authority to the conference and the summit that we were putting on, so that those people I was reaching out to that had never really had a conversation, maybe I wasn't on their radar at all, even if I had shared on Twitter or even if I, pinned and done all the things, those people may not know who I was, but they knew, so-and-so's their buddy and that buddy is on here. And then they could ask like, hey, how's the summit? And the person could tell them. So I made sure to kind of use that to kind of lend some credence and authority if I was reaching out to someone who was cold. So the same thing with podcast interviews. If I ask someone who may not, I've been trying to get on the radar, but they may not know me still, I might mention, okay, I've already had Darren Rouse from ProBlogger on my podcast, and that's a big name. They're like, oh, okay, and maybe not. Maybe that means nothing to them. You just never know. I've actually had some people surprisingly who have way smaller audiences than some of the people that have been on the podcast or even at the summit said no for just weird reasons or wanted really specific numbers or things that I just didn't feel comfortable giving, and kind of felt like if you're, I know who you are, I know kind of your sphere of influence, and if you're kind of feeling like you're too big for this, I probably just don't want you anyway. And I do understand that people are busy, but for me, that was kind of a nice thing that let me know if I maybe didn't want that person after all. And so I use that like as a litmus test. If somebody was going to come back to me and want, like, if you don't have X number of email subscribers, I don't want you. And I was like, then I don't want you. This is a good test. I don't want you on my podcast because that's not what I want to keep moving forward. Because again, those influencers, I think they got there somehow too. And I do know, I'll share this one story and then I'll close. I will not share the name, but there's a particularly large blogger who sort of built his platform by utilizing the influence of others. And then he became really big. And for the most part, unless the people were super famous, he forgot them. And I know this because this was one of those situations where I happened to mention like, man, this person drives me nuts. And all the people are like, me too, me too, me too. And so I started hearing the stories about how he had done that and taken somebody's knowledge or their influence and used them as a stepping stone and then left them down there and went up and then was suddenly like unreachable and untouchable. Again, the word gets out about that, and that's not the reputation I don't think you want. And I like for people to think of their own philosophies, but I never want to encourage somebody to have that philosophy where you build on somebody else's back and use them as a stepping stone, pushing them down while you're pushing yourself up. I'll close with this. Last year or maybe when was it? 2 years ago at the Blog Elevated conference, Bjork and Lindsay Ostrom from Pinch of Yum spoke. And this was, I think, a Roosevelt quote, not theirs, but they talked about how a rising tide lifts all ships. I think the actual quote is boats, but I think it sounds nicer as ships. And so what that means is if we're all getting better, we're all going up. And so we should all be helping each other get better. And that's, I think, such an important philosophy all around, whether you're looking at somebody below you, someone at the same level, and someone above you. And also, like, who's to say what above you is? Like, we're all famous in our own way, right? And in your own sphere, like maybe you're really awesome at Instagram and you don't understand email, or vice versa. Or maybe you're really good at this platform and not good at another. We all have that. And I know looking around and following different people who are speaking at the summit or attending the summit, I've seen people with like 50 Twitter followers and 500,000 Pinterest followers. You just never know. People are big on different places. We all have something we bring to the table. If we're all encouraging and building each other up and not using each other for personal gain, we're all going to lift. We're lifting that tide. We're lifting all the ships. And so I think that's just what I want to leave you with. It's really important to connect. It's easier than you think to connect with influencers. There is a right way to do it. And we all want to be getting better and encouraging other people to get better as well. All right. I hope that was encouraging and inspiring to you and even actionable. I like when things are actionable in terms of what you can do and how you can reach out to influencers, both successfully with good results and also in a way that doesn't burn bridges, in a way that establishes relationships and also doesn't leave you feeling gross and icky inside. Because clearly this is not the podcast for you if you don't care about feeling gross and icky and smarmy, because that's the thing I just keep harping on, right? We're going to always come back to that. So I hope that you guys can take some of these things and find ways that you can have partnerships with influencers who are above you and also collaborate with the people on your level and also collaborate with people who are just starting out or who need to know what you knew maybe like a year or 6 months ago. Because I think that's so important in this online world as a writer, as a blogger, just as a person trying to establish some kind of platform and connections online. We just need each other. So it's really important. I would love to connect with you, so I hope that you will come and join our Facebook community. You can find that at createifwriting.com/community. I've also got an email list where I email you guys every Thursday with actionable links and things that I think are important to know from the internet. And you can find out about that at createifwriting.com/subscribe. In the show notes for this episode, if you want to kind of see a written outline of the things I talked about, it will be at createifwriting.com/044. So clearly you got to get over to the website and find a bunch of stuff, but I'm really happy to connect with you. I love my listeners and hearing from you guys who miss me when I have the weeks where my computer eats the episode, and from the people who really enjoy the episodes. It's really great to get emails from you guys, to hear you in the Facebook group. So that's why I'm doing this, because I know you're out there listening. So thank you. I'd also like to thank Jasmine Commerce, who does the amazing music for the intro and outro, and I hope you will go check her out at jasminecommercemusic.com. Thank you so much again for listening, and I hope you have an inspired week.